In the harsh lands of the American frontier, legends are born in blood and bullets. But some legends, when they're written by the steady hand of a man who can split a raindrop at 1,000 paces. This is the tale of Marcus Thorne, a man who walked away from war only to find himself hunted by those who didn't know that every bullet he fired had claimed 1,000 souls before. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The autumn of 1875 painted the Montana Territory in shades of gold and crimson, but for Captain Marcus Thorne, the colors had long since faded to gray. Fort Richardson rose from the rugged landscape like a wooden giant, its weathered walls telling tales of countless battles against both nature and man. The fort's strategic position overlooking Thunder Valley had made it the crown jewel of the territory's military operations, but today, something felt different about its usual bustling activity. Marcus guided his horse through the main gate, noting how the regular soldiers avoided his gaze. His reputation had always preceded him. The man who could shoot a playing card edge-on at 300 yards, who had never missed a shot in his entire military career. But there was something else in their averted eyes today, something that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. The stables smelled of fresh hay and leather polish. As Marcus dismounted, he caught fragments of hushed conversations between stable boys about Ghost Valley and missing supplies. He filed away the information, knowing that in his line of work, even whispers could save lives. His boots echoed against the wooden floors of the command building as he made his way to General Richard Hawthorne's office. The urgent summons had pulled him away from Sarah just as she was planning their anniversary celebration. 3 days, he had promised her. I'll be back in 3 days. The memory of her worried smile haunted him now. 2 guards flanked Hawthorne's door, their rifles held with unusual tension. Marcus recognized one, Private Jenkins, a young soldier who'd once asked him for shooting lessons. Today, Jenkins looked straight through him as if he were a stranger. Inside General Hawthorne's office was a testament to military precision. Maps covered the walls, their surfaces marked with pins and strings tracking troop movements and supply lines. The general himself stood at the window, his reflection in the glass showing eyes that had seen too much war to remain entirely human. Captain Thorne. Hawthorne's voice carried the weight of authority earned in the blood-soaked fields of the Civil War. Your reputation precedes you. He turned, revealing a face weathered by sun and gunpowder. They say at Broken Ridge, you made a shot that saved an entire platoon. 200 yards, heavy wind, moving target. Just doing my duty, sir, Marcus replied, his hand unconsciously touching the custom-made rifle at his side, a weapon crafted by the legendary gunsmith Thomas Fletcher. The rifle's stock bore the marks of countless battles, each scratching a story of lives saved and taken. Hawthorne moved to his desk, unrolling a detailed map of the territory. Your modesty does you credit, Captain, but we both know it's more than that. The men call you Ghost Eye. Say you can see what others can't, shoot what others wouldn't dare attempt. Marcus remained silent, studying the general's movements. Something was off about his usual commanding demeanor. A slight tremor in his hands, a sheen of sweat despite the cool autumn air. I have a mission that requires your particular skills, Hawthorne continued, his finger tracing a path across the map to a small settlement. Ghost Valley, a mining town. A group of deserters has taken refuge there, stolen something valuable, something that could compromise our entire Western operation. What exactly did they take, sir? Marcus asked, noting how Hawthorne's finger lingered too long on the settlement's location. That's need to know, Captain, Hawthorne snapped. Your orders are simple. Eliminate the deserters. All of them. No witnesses. The words hung in the air like gunsmoke. Marcus thought of Sarah again, of her gentle voice reminding him that a man's soul was worth more than his orders. Sir, Ghost Valley is a civilian settlement. There are families there, children. Your orders are clear. Hawthorne's facade cracked, revealing something desperate underneath. These men are traitors. Sometimes sacrifices must be made for the greater good. In that moment, Marcus saw what he'd been blind to before. The unusual guard placement, the nervous soldiers, the whispered conversations. This wasn't about deserters. This was about covering up something far worse. "No, sir," Marcus said quietly, shifting his weight slightly. "I won't murder innocent people to cover up your crimes." The general's face twisted into something ugly. "Then you've signed your own death warrant." He nodded to someone behind Marcus. Captain Daniel Reed emerged from the shadows, his pistol already drawn. But Marcus hadn't earned his reputation by being slow. In one fluid motion, he kicked backward, sending Reed's shot wide. The bullet splintered the window, sending glass cascading to the floor like deadly rain. The next few seconds were a deadly dance. Marcus drove his elbow into Reed's throat, seized the captain's gun hand, and used him as a shield against the guards who burst through the door. Their hesitation was all he needed. 2 precise shots rang out, one bullet grazing each guard's shoulder, dropping them without killing them. "You're making a mistake, Thorne," Hawthorne growled, drawing his own weapon. "By sunrise tomorrow, every bounty hunter from here to Texas will know your face. You'll be branded a traitor, hunted like an animal." Marcus backed toward the shattered window, keeping Reed between himself and the general. Through the broken glass, he could see the fort's courtyard erupting into chaos. Better a hunted man than one who's lost his soul. With that, he pushed Reed forward and leaped. His landing rolled him behind a stack of supply crates as bullets splintered the wood around him. Years of training took over as he moved through the shadows, each shot from his rifle finding its mark in weapons and ropes, never flesh. By the time he reached the stables, the alarm bells were ringing across the fort. As he galloped into the gathering dusk, Hawthorne's voice carried on the wind. "Find him. I want his head brought to me before he can expose us." Marcus rode hard into the wilderness, knowing his life had changed forever. But he didn't ride toward home. He couldn't risk leading them to Sarah. Instead, he headed for the territories where a man's worth was measured not by his rank or uniform, but by the truth in his heart and the steadiness of his aim. Little did the bounty hunters know, they weren't chasing some ordinary soldier. They were hunting the man who could thread a needle with a bullet at 100 paces, who could read the wind like others read books, and who had never taken a life without first offering a chance at redemption. They were about to learn that some legends are born not from the stories told about them, but from the bullets they choose not to fire. 3 weeks after fleeing Fort Richardson, Marcus Thorne found himself in the rough settlement of Devil's Fork, a place where law and order were as scarce as water in the desert. The ramshackle town had sprung up around a copper mine that had run dry years ago, leaving behind a collection of desperate souls and broken dreams. The saloon, ironically named the Lucky Strike, stood as the town's beating heart, its weather-beaten exterior hiding secrets darker than the coffee they served. Through the grimy window, Marcus watched as another group of bounty hunters rode into town, their horses kicking up dust in the dying light. The wanted posters plastered across the territory now offered $5,000 for his capture, dead or alive. The price had doubled since last week, telling him that General Hawthorne was getting desperate. Each poster bore his military photograph, the stern-faced captain who'd once been decorated for valor, now branded a traitor and murderer. More coffee? Maria Santiago, the innkeeper, appeared at his table. Her weather-worn face carried both kindness and cunning, and Marcus had learned to trust her discretion. She'd inherited the Lucky Strike from her late husband, and the place had become a clearinghouse for information that never made it into official telegrams. "Thank you, Maria," he said, sliding his cup forward. As she poured, her practiced hands never trembling despite the tension in her voice, she whispered, "Wild Bill Carson arrived an hour ago. He's got 20 men with him, all loaded for bear. They've been asking questions all over town, showing your picture in every establishment." Marcus nodded slightly, keeping his face neutral. His fingers traced the rim of his coffee cup, mind calculating escape routes and angles of fire. Wild Bill's reputation as a ruthless bounty hunter was well earned. The man had brought in more outlaws dead than alive, and his tracking skills were legendary. Stories spoke of him following a man's trail through a thunderstorm, reading signs that would be invisible to lesser trackers. "They're saying you massacred a whole town," Maria continued, her voice barely audible above the saloon's ambient noise. She busied herself wiping the already clean table. "But I know better. My brother served with you at Broken Ridge, said you wouldn't shoot a man who was surrendering even when ordered to. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now, back to the story." The memory of Broken Ridge flashed through Marcus's mind. The whistling wind, the weight of his rifle, the lives hanging in the balance. Before he could respond, the saloon's batwing doors burst open with enough force to rattle the bottles behind the bar. The usual cacophony of clinking glasses and drunken conversations died instantly. William Wild Bill Carson strode in, his long coat dusted with the territory's red dirt, a matched pair of silver-plated revolvers hanging low on his hips. He cut an imposing figure, standing well over 6 feet tall, with a face scarred by countless battles and eyes that seemed to capture every detail in the room. 6 of his men followed, spreading out through the room with practiced efficiency, their movements speaking of military training. Marcus remained still, his face hidden beneath the brim of his hat. His rifle rested against his chair, within easy reach but not obviously threatening. Through subtle glances, he counted 4 more men taking positions outside the windows, their shadows visible against the fading daylight. The rest of Carson's crew had likely circled around back, cutting off any escape through the kitchen. Carson approached the bar with deliberate slowness, his spurs jingling with each step like a rattlesnake's warning. "Looking for a man," he announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet room. Each word was carefully chosen, measured like bullets in a cylinder. "Captain Marcus Thorne, Army deserter, traitor, and murderer." He placed a wanted poster on the bar, smoothing it with calloused hands. $5,000 to anyone who can point him out, dead or alive, though death might be easier for everyone involved. The saloon's patrons stirred, greed warring with fear in their eyes. Marcus noticed Maria slipping quietly toward the kitchen, her hand brushing a shelf where he knew she kept a shotgun. Her movement was casual, but he recognized the subtle shift in her stance. She was preparing for trouble. "Heard he's the best shot in the territories," Carson continued, turning to survey the room. His eyes moved methodically, studying each face. "They call him Ghost Eye Da, say he can shoot the wings off a fly at 100 paces. His hand rested casually on one of his revolvers, thumb brushing the hammer. "Course, that doesn't mean much when you're caught sleeping or shot in the back. Even the best shooter bleeds like any other man." Marcus felt the weight of his rifle, knowing he could easily put a bullet through Carson's heart before the man could draw. But that would mean killing the bounty hunters too. Men who were just doing their job, probably with families waiting at home. The same families he'd once sworn to protect when he put on the uniform. The tension broke when a drunk prospector staggered to his feet, gold dust still clinging to his filthy beard. He pointed a shaking finger at a young cowboy in the corner. "That's him. That's Thorne. I saw his picture." Chaos erupted as Carson's men converged on the terrified cowboy. Marcus used the distraction to slip through the kitchen, nodding thanks to Maria as she held the back door open. Their eyes met briefly, both knowing this might be the last time they saw each other alive. But as he stepped into the alley, the cool evening air carrying the scent of sage and gunpowder, he found himself facing a familiar figure. Victoria Vix Blackwood stood in the shadows, her repeating rifle aimed steadily at his chest. The famous tracker's dark eyes studied him with professional interest, missing nothing. Her reputation rivaled Carson's, but where he brought in bodies, she brought in answers. "You're quieter than they said," she remarked, her voice low and controlled. "Most men would have started shooting by now, especially men with your skill." Most men don't think about the innocent people who'd get caught in the crossfire, Marcus replied, keeping his hands visible. His eyes met hers steadily. You're Vix Blackwood. They say you can track a ghost across bare rock, that you've never lost a trail once you've picked it up. And you're the man who never misses. She tilted her head, moonlight catching the silver streaks in her dark hair. The legendary ghost eye. Question is, are you the cold-blooded killer they're paying us to bring in, or is there something more to this story? 5,000 is a lot of money for a simple deserter. Through the weather-worn boards of the saloon wall, they could hear Carson interrogating the young cowboy, his voice rising in frustration. The sound of breaking glass and overturned furniture suggested the search was becoming more aggressive. We've got about 30 seconds before they check the kitchen, Vic said, her rifle unwavering. Despite the urgency, her breathing remained calm, her aim steady. I've been following your trail for 2 weeks, Thorne. You've had plenty of chances to kill, but you haven't taken a single life. Even left medicines for that sick family in Copper Creek. Then you know something's not right about these charges, Marcus responded, hearing boots approaching the kitchen door. The question is, are you interested in the truth, or just the bounty? Something flickered in Vix's eyes. She'd done her homework, he realized. She knew the details didn't add up. The lack of bodies, the increasing bounty, the urgency in Hawthorne's orders. 20 seconds, she murmured, then lowered her rifle slightly. There's an abandoned mine shaft half a mile north past the old copper smelter. Meet me there at midnight. Bring proof of what really happened at Fort Richardson, or I'll personally put you in chains and collect that bounty. And if I can prove Hawthorne's the real criminal, then you'll have the territory's best tracker helping you expose him. She gestured toward the dark end of the alley. Now go. Carson's men are thorough. They'll be here any second. Marcus nodded and slipped past her into the gathering darkness, moving like a shadow through the narrow spaces between buildings. As he retrieved his horse from the hidden spot behind the livery stable, he heard Carson's angry voice organizing search parties, dividing the town into sectors. Riding north under the stars, he thought about Vix's demand for proof. He had something better than paper evidence. He had the truth about what Hawthorne was hiding in Ghost Valley, about the missing supplies, about the real reason for the deserter's flight. The question was, would the territory's best tracker believe him, or would she decide the bounty was worth more than justice? The abandoned mine shaft waited ahead, its black mouth a reminder that sometimes to find the light, you had to be willing to step into the darkness first. As Marcus approached, he noticed signs that made his trained eye pause, subtle marks in the dust, the positioning of loose rocks, the way the surrounding brush had been disturbed. Either Vix was already there, watching his approach, or this was about to become a very different kind of meeting. The abandoned mineshaft loomed before Marcus, like a dragon's maw, its weathered timber supports creaking softly in the night wind. The moon cast long shadows across the entrance, where rusted mining equipment lay scattered like fallen soldiers. Every instinct honed from years of military service told him this could be a perfect ambush point. He'd arrived 30 minutes early, using the time to study the area from different vantage points. The mine sat in a natural depression surrounded by rocky outcrops that could hide a dozen men, but Marcus's keen eyes spotted only one other person's presence, Vix Blackwood, positioned cleverly behind a boulder to his left, her rifle trained on the mine's entrance. "You can come out now," Marcus called softly. "Your hiding spot is good, but you shifted those rocks at the base, left a pattern no desert wind would make." A low chuckle emerged from the shadows, followed by Vix herself. Her dark clothing helped her blend into the night, but Marcus caught the glint of a knife at her belt besides the rifle. Most men wouldn't have noticed that. Then again, most men can't shoot like you either. "Most trackers wouldn't have found me at all," Marcus replied, keeping his distance. "You figured out I was in Devil's Fork by tracking the medicine I left for that family in Copper Creek, didn't you?" Vix nodded, her expression unreadable in the moonlight. A man running for his life doesn't usually stop to help strangers, unless he's not the killer they say he is. She gestured toward the mine entrance. "We should talk inside. Carson's men are sweeping the area in a grid pattern, They'll reach this sector within the hour. Marcus followed her into the mine, noting how she moved with the same precise awareness he'd developed through years of combat. The first 20 feet of the shaft were reinforced with timber, opening into a larger chamber that still held old mining equipment and supplies. Vix lit a small lantern, keeping the flame low. "All right, Ghost Eye. You've got until Carson's men arrive to convince me you're not a traitor and a murderer. What really happened at Fort Richardson?" Marcus sat on an old crate, his rifle across his knees. "It started with supply shipments, artillery shells, repeating rifles, ammunition, enough to arm a small army. But they weren't going to any military outpost. Hawthorne was selling them to private militias, anyone with gold to spend." "That's a serious accusation," Vic said, leaning against a support beam. "Got any proof?" Marcus reached slowly into his coat, producing a small leather-bound ledger. "Sergeant James Cooper managed to get this to me before Hawthorne's men caught him. It's a record of every illegal shipment, every payment. Cooper paid for it with his life." Vix took the ledger, her eyes widening as she scanned the pages in the lantern light. "These numbers. This isn't just corruption. This is enough firepower to start a war." "That's exactly what Hawthorne's planning," Marcus continued. "The deserters in Ghost Valley. They're not deserters at all. They're honest soldiers who discovered the truth. Hawthorne ordered me to murder them and everyone in that town to keep his secret safe." A sound from outside made them both freeze. Voices carried on the wind, accompanied by the distant thud of hoofbeats. Carson's men were getting closer. "Why didn't you just report him to higher command?" Vix asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I tried. But Hawthorne's got friends in high places. Every officer I could trust has either been transferred, silenced, or bought off. That's why he's so desperate to find me. I'm the last loose end who knows the full scope of his operation." Vic studied him for a long moment, her tracker's instincts weighing every word, every gesture. Finally, she spoke. "There's more to this story. Something you're not telling me." Marcus nodded grimly. "Ghost Valley isn't just a hiding place for those soldiers. They found something in Hawthorne's private correspondence. He's not just arming militias, he's building his own army. Come spring, he plans to use these weapons to seize control of the entire territory. Thousands of innocent people will die." The hoofbeats were getting closer. Vix quickly doused the lantern, plunging them into darkness. "6 riders," she whispered, "coming from the north, 2 more groups approaching from the east and west." "They're boxing us in," Marcus observed. "Carson's smarter than I gave him credit for." He could hear the men dismounting, their boots crunching on gravel. "There's another way out," Vix said. "This mine connects to a whole network of tunnels. I mapped them while tracking a fugitive last year, but you'll have to trust me." Marcus smiled in the darkness. "Trust the woman who was hunting me an hour ago?" "Trust the woman who just heard enough to know that bringing you in would make her part of Hawthorne's crimes," Vix replied. "Besides, I haven't collected a bounty in weeks. Starting to think my conscience is bad for business." The sound of voices was just outside now. A beam of lamplight cut through the mine entrance like a blade. "Check every shaft," Carson's voice carried clearly. "He's here somewhere. 500 extra to the man who spots him first." Marcus stood silently, weighing his options. Everything in his military training warned against trusting an enemy. But something in Vix's voice, in the way she'd listened to his story, told him she was different. "Lead the way," he whispered. "But know this, if you're planning to betray me, you better be faster with that rifle than I am with mine." "If I was planning to betray you," Vix replied, already moving deeper into the mine, "I'd have collected that bounty back in Devil's Fork. Now come on, Ghost Eye. Let's see if you can shoot as well in the dark as they say you can." The network of mine tunnels twisted beneath the earth like a snake's coils, each turn revealing new passages that seemed to lead deeper into the mountain's heart. Marcus and Vix moved silently through the darkness, their footsteps muffled by years of accumulated dust. Above them, the distant sounds of Carson's men searching grew fainter as they penetrated further into the labyrinth. These tunnels were used by smugglers during the war. Vix explained in a hushed voice, her hand trailing along the rough-hewn wall. They connect to an old trading post about 2 miles south. Most folks think this section collapsed years ago. Marcus noticed how she navigated the darkness with practiced ease, every step confident despite the treacherous footing. "You've used these tunnels before," he observed. "More than just for tracking that fugitive you mentioned." A quiet laugh echoed softly. "Let's just say I wasn't always on this side of the law. Some of us had to learn things the hard way before finding a better path." Their conversation was interrupted by a rumbling sound from above, followed by cascading dust and small stones. Carson's men were getting serious about their search, perhaps even using dynamite to try to flush them out. "They're going to bring the whole mountain down if they keep that up," Vix muttered, quickening her pace. "There's a chamber ahead where we can rest for a minute. Need to show you something anyway." The chamber turned out to be an old storage area, mining equipment still scattered about like forgotten toys. Vix produced a small, shielded lantern from her pack, its dim light revealing walls covered in crude maps and markings. "Smugglers' navigation points," she explained, studying the wall carefully. "But look at this." She pointed to a series of fresh marks scratched into the rock. "These are military supply routes. Someone's been using these tunnels recently and they're moving heavy cargo." Marcus examined the markings closely, his military training helping him decipher their meaning. "These match the routes in Cooper's ledger. Hawthorne's been moving his illegal weapons through here, right under everyone's noses." "Smart," Vix admitted. "No one thinks to check abandoned mines for arms shipments. But there's something else." She moved the lantern, illuminating a different section of wall. "These marks here? They're new, maybe a week old. They show a massive shipment moving towards Ghost Valley." Before Marcus could respond, a sound echoed through the tunnels. Boots on stone, but not from the direction they'd come. Someone else was down here with them. They extinguished the lantern immediately, pressing themselves against opposite walls of the chamber. Marcus's rifle found its way to his shoulder by instinct, while Vix drew her knife, its blade catching a faint glint of light from somewhere above. The footsteps grew closer, accompanied by the subtle jingling of spurs. Then a voice called out, barely above a whisper. "Captain Thorne." "I know you're down here, sir. I need to speak with you." Marcus tensed. He knew that voice. "Private Jenkins?" The young soldier who'd once asked him for shooting lessons emerged from the darkness, his uniform dirty and torn. His hands were raised, showing he held no weapon. "Sir, I've been trying to find you," Jenkins said urgently. "It's about your wife, Sarah." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. "Sarah? What about her?" "Hawthorne's men took her 3 days ago. They're holding her at Fort Richardson as bait. The general knows you'll come for her." Jenkins swallowed hard. "There's more, sir. She's with a child. Your child." The revelation seemed to draw all the air from the chamber. Marcus felt his world tilting on its axis. He hadn't known, hadn't suspected. Sarah must have learned of her condition after he'd fled. "How did you find us?" Vix demanded, her knife still ready. "I've been following the search parties, staying just close enough to hear their plans," Jenkins explained. "When I saw them heading for the mines, I remembered these old smuggling tunnels from my patrol routes. Figured you might use them to escape." "And Hawthorne just let you walk away from the fort?" Vix's voice dripped with skepticism. "I deserted 2 days ago after they brought Mrs. Thorne in. Couldn't stomach what they were doing anymore. The general's gone mad, sir. He's talking about making examples of traitors, public executions. You need to—" Jenkins's words were cut short by another explosion from above, this one closer than the others. The tunnel shook violently, sending cascades of dirt and rock raining down. "They're getting closer," Vix warned. "We need to move." But Marcus stood frozen, his mind racing. Sarah was pregnant. She was in Hawthorne's custody. Every instinct screamed at him to rush to Fort Richardson immediately, but he knew that's exactly what Hawthorne wanted. Sir, Jenkins pressed. There's a group of loyal soldiers ready to help. Men who remember what you did at Broken Ridge. We can get her out, but we have to move fast. It's a trap, Vic stated flatly. Has to be. They're using your wife to draw you out, force you to make a mistake. Of course it's a trap, Marcus replied, his voice tight with controlled emotion. But that doesn't change the fact that Sarah's in danger, that my child is in danger. He turned to Jenkins. How many loyal men do you have? 8, sir, all good soldiers. They're waiting at a camp near Crystal Creek. Another explosion rocked the tunnel, closer still. Dust filled the air, making it hard to breathe. We need to make a decision now, Vix urged. Those charges are getting closer, and these old tunnels won't take much more punishment. Marcus looked between his two companions, the young soldier offering hope and the tracker, whose instincts screamed danger. Both could be telling the truth. Both could be lying. But one truth stood above all others. Sarah needed him. Lead us to your camp, he told Jenkins. But know this, if you're lying, if this is a trap, my first bullet will find you before anyone else can blink. Jenkins nodded solemnly. Understood, sir. Crystal Creek is about 3 hours' ride east of here. We should be able to reach it before dawn if we hurry. I'm coming with you, Vix announced, sheathing her knife. Someone needs to watch your back, and I've got a feeling this is about to get a lot more complicated than a simple bounty hunt. The journey to Crystal Creek took them through some of the roughest terrain in the territory, following game trails and dry creek beds to avoid the main roads where Carson's men might be watching. The pre-dawn air carried a bitter chill, and low clouds threatened rain, weather that would make tracking difficult but perfect for their clandestine movement. Marcus rode slightly behind Jenkins, studying the young private's every move. Something about the soldier's story nagged at him, like a splinter under the skin. Jenkins had been too well informed about the smuggling tunnels, too conveniently placed to find them. Yet the news about Sarah rang true. It was exactly the kind of strategy Hawthorne would employ. Vix brought up the rear, her tracker's eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. Occasionally she would signal them to halt, listening for pursuit, or checking signs that only she could read in the dim light. After one such stop, she guided her horse alongside Marcus's. Your friend up there is taking a mighty circular route, she whispered. Could be trying to avoid patrols, but... Or leading us into something, Marcus finished. I know. Been counting his calls since we left the mine. Man's got a nervous tick in his left hand every time he mentions the camp. The sky was beginning to lighten when Jenkins finally raised his hand, signaling them to stop. They had reached a sheltered valley where Crystal Creek cut through the rocky landscape. A thin wisp of smoke rose from behind a stand of cottonwoods. The camp's just ahead, Jenkins said, pointing to the smoke. The men will be expecting us. Marcus exchanged a quick glance with Vix. They both knew that no experienced soldier would light a fire when trying to stay hidden, especially not at dawn when smoke was most visible. You and your men must have been in quite a hurry to desert, Marcus commented casually, his hand resting near his rifle. Leaving without proper supplies, having to risk a fire. Jenkins's left hand twitched. We didn't have much choice, sir, when they brought your wife in. His words were cut short by the distinctive click of Vix's rifle being cocked. That's the 4th time you've mentioned his wife, she said coldly. Funny how you keep bringing her up whenever the conversation turns uncomfortable. The young private's face remained neutral, but sweat had begun to bead on his forehead despite the morning chill. Just trying to emphasize the urgency of our situation, ma'am. No, Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of certainty. You're trying to keep me focused on Sarah so I won't ask too many questions. Like how you knew exactly where to find us in those tunnels, or why a group of deserters would camp so close to a main trading route. Jenkins's hand moved suddenly toward his belt, but Marcus was faster. His rifle seemed to materialize in his hands, the barrel pressing against the private's chest. Don't, he warned, quietly. For a moment, only the sound of the creek filled the air. Then Jenkins's shoulders slumped. They said you were good, he admitted, his voice changing, losing its nervous edge. but I didn't expect you to be this good." "Who's they, Jenkins?" Marcus demanded. "Hawthorne?" A bitter laugh escaped the private's lips. "Hawthorne? He's just another piece on the board, Captain. You think this is about some corrupt general selling weapons. This goes so much deeper." The sound of multiple rifles being cocked echoed through the valley. Dark figures emerged from behind rocks and trees. At least a dozen men, all wearing cavalry uniforms, all with their weapons trained on Marcus and Vix. "The weapons, the corruption, the bounty hunters, it's all theater," Jenkins continued, his entire demeanor transforming. "We needed everyone looking in the wrong direction while the real operation proceeded. And you, Captain Thorne, with your reputation for honesty and your famous marksmanship, you were the perfect distraction." "The perfect scapegoat, you mean," Vix corrected, her rifle still aimed steadily at Jenkins despite the men surrounding them. "Call it what you want." Jenkins smiled coldly. "But the fact remains that while everyone's been chasing the legendary Ghost Eye across the territory, no one's noticed the real cargo moving through those smuggling tunnels. No one's asked why certain influential people have been quietly moving their assets east. And no one's going to ask any questions when the territory erupts into chaos next week." Marcus's mind raced, connecting pieces of a puzzle he hadn't even known he was solving. The weapons shipments were never meant for militias, he realized. They were a cover for something else, something bigger. "Much bigger," Jenkins confirmed. "But I'm afraid you won't be around to see it unfold. Still, I'll give you this comfort. Your wife really is at Fort Richardson, and she really is expecting. Shame neither of you will live to meet your child." The valley erupted into violence. Marcus kicked his horse sideways as bullets tore through the space where he'd been sitting. In one fluid motion, he brought his rifle up and fired twice. 2 of the hidden soldiers fell, their shots going wild. Vix had already thrown herself from her horse, using the animal's bulk as cover while she returned fire. "Quite a mess you've led us into, Ghost Eye," she called out, her rifle cracking with deadly precision. "Could say the same about you, Tracker," Marcus replied, diving behind a boulder as bullets chipped away at the stone. "Any brilliant ideas?" "Just one," Vix shouted back. "But you're not going to like it." Before Marcus could respond, Jenkins's voice cut through the gunfire. "You can't escape this time, Captain. Even if you survive us, the entire territory's looking for you, your wife's running out of time, and next week everything you've ever fought for will burn." The gunfight at Crystal Creek had turned the peaceful valley into a storm of lead and gun smoke. Marcus moved like a ghost between cover positions, each shot from his rifle finding its mark with deadly precision. 3 more of Jenkins's men had fallen, but the remaining soldiers had adapted to his tactics, keeping him pinned with coordinated fire while slowly closing the distance. Vix had disappeared into the brush along the creek, using the terrain to her advantage. Occasional shots from unexpected angles told Marcus she was still in the fight, keeping their attackers off balance, but they were badly outnumbered and ammunition wouldn't last forever. "Your reputation wasn't exaggerated, Captain," Jenkins called out from his protected position. 6 men down and we still can't get a clean shot at you, Ian. But you're only delaying the inevitable. Even if you escape us, where will you go? Every lawman and bounty hunter in the territory is looking for you, and time's running out for your wife. Marcus checked his ammunition, 4 rounds left in the rifle, plus his revolver. Not enough for a straight fight, he needed to change the game. "You seem awfully concerned about my wife, Jenkins," he shouted back, carefully shifting position. "For someone who claims this is all theater, you keep coming back to her. Almost like you're afraid I might start asking different questions." A bullet splintered the rock near his head, but Marcus caught the slight pause in Jenkins's response. "Just trying to give you a noble reason to surrender, Captain. Die trying to save your wife instead of uncovering things better left buried." "Speaking of things buried," Vix's voice carried from somewhere to their left, followed by 2 rapid shots that sent Jenkins's men scrambling for new cover. "Those tunnels we found. They're not just for weapons, are they? The fresh marks we saw, they were marking a different kind of cargo route." Another pause in the gunfire. Marcus used the moment to dart between boulders, closing the distance to Jenkins's position. 3 rounds left. "You're both entirely too clever for your own good," Jenkins said, his voice carrying an edge of frustration. "But it doesn't matter what you figured out. By this time next week, the entire territory will be in chaos. The army will be called in to restore order, martial law will be declared, and certain parties will acquire vast tracts of land for pennies on the dollar. A perfect legal transfer of power and wealth." "Using my disgrace as the spark," Marcus added, finally understanding the full scope of the plan. "The famous Ghost Eye went rogue, murdering innocent people, leading to widespread panic and a collapse of local authority. Meanwhile, the real operation continues under the cover of chaos." "And Sarah?" Vix asked, still hidden but moving closer. "Where does she fit in your grand plan?" Jenkins laughed, a cold sound that echoed through the valley. "Insurance, nothing more. We knew the captain's moral code wouldn't let him run forever while his pregnant wife remained in danger. Sooner or later he'd have to make a move on Fort Richardson, probably getting himself killed in the process. A tragic end to a once heroic soldier." 2 rounds left. Marcus caught a glimpse of Vix's position and understood her plan. She had worked her way around to flank Jenkins's group, but she'd need a distraction. "You made one mistake, Jenkins," Marcus called out, preparing to move. "You assumed I'd be predictable, that I'd react exactly as you planned. But there's a reason they call me Ghost Eye, and it's not just because I never miss." "Really, Captain? And what mistake would that be?" Marcus stood suddenly, exposing himself to fire. Multiple rifles turned his way, but he had eyes only for Jenkins' position. "You forgot that sometimes the best shot is the one you don't take." He aimed high, his last 2 rounds striking a precariously balanced boulder above Jenkins' men. The impact sent it tumbling down, forcing them to dive away from their cover. In that moment of chaos, Vix struck from behind, her rifle dropping 2 more soldiers while Marcus charged forward, drawing his revolver. Jenkins managed to bring his weapon around, but Marcus was already there, knocking the rifle aside and pressing his revolver against the private's chest. "It's over," Marcus said quietly. "Call your men off." But Jenkins just smiled, that same cold expression. "Is it over, Captain?" "You're still a wanted man. Your wife's still in Hawthorne's custody, and you're no closer to stopping what's coming. Kill me and you'll never find out who's really behind all this." "Maybe," Vix said, emerging from cover with her rifle trained on the remaining soldiers. "But we know enough now to start asking the right questions, like why certain wealthy landowners have been selling their properties to anonymous buyers, or why supply caravans have been carrying mining equipment into areas with no known mines. And most importantly," Marcus added, "we know when it's all supposed to happen. Next week, you said, which means we still have time to expose the truth." "The truth?" Jenkins laughed again. "The truth is, you're going to have to make a choice, Captain. Right here, right now, you can either try to stop our operation, or you can save your wife. But you can't do both. There isn't time." Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger, but he forced himself to remain calm. "You're awfully confident for someone at the wrong end of a gun." "Because I know you, Captain. Know how your mind works. Even now, you're calculating whether you can force me to talk, how long it would take to verify whatever I tell you, whether you can trust anything I say about Sarah, and all the while, the clock is ticking." The worst part was, Jenkins was right. Every moment spent here was a moment lost, and Sarah's life hung in the balance. But if what Jenkins said about next week was true, thousands of lives could be at stake. "Time to make your choice, Ghost Eye," Jenkins said softly. "The hero who saves his wife, or the hero who saves the territory. You can't be both. Not this time." The morning sun had finally created the mountains, casting long shadows across Crystal Creek. Marcus kept his revolver trained on Jenkins while his mind raced through possibilities. The private's words had struck home. Time was a luxury he didn't have, and every choice now carried a devastating price. "You don't have to make this decision alone," Vix said quietly, her rifle still covering the remaining soldiers. Whatever you choose, I've got your back. Jenkins smirked at their exchange. How touching. The bounty hunter and the fugitive, united in a noble cause. But sentiment won't save your wife, Captain. Even now, Hawthorne's patience grows thin. He's given orders that if you haven't been captured by sunset tomorrow, Sarah's usefulness as a hostage ends. Marcus's finger tightened on the trigger. You're awfully willing to share information for someone who claims to be part of a bigger conspiracy. Because it doesn't matter what I tell you, Jenkins replied with infuriating confidence. You can either chase down our operation and maybe, if you're lucky, expose a fraction of what's really happening, or you can save Sarah and your unborn child. You can't do both, and we both know which choice you'll make. Your conscience won't let you sacrifice your family. A sudden commotion from the creek bed interrupted them. One of Vic's warning shots scattered a group of Jenkins's men who had tried to flank their position. The sound of approaching horses echoed through the valley. More companies are coming, Vix warned. Sounds like at least a dozen riders moving fast. Could be Carson's men. They would have heard the gunfire. Jenkins' smile widened. The noose tightens, Captain. Time to choose. But Marcus had been watching Jenkins carefully throughout their conversation, noting every subtle reaction, every tell. You know what's interesting? He said conversationally. Every time you mention Sarah, your eyes shift slightly to the left. It's a common tell when someone's mixing truth with lies. What are you talking about? Sarah is at Fort Richardson. That part's true. But the deadline? That's a lie. Something else is happening tomorrow at sunset, isn't it? Something that made you desperate enough to spring this trap even though it meant exposing parts of your plan. The first flash of real concern crossed Jenkins's face. Vix picked up on Marcus's line of thinking immediately. The supply caravans, she said. They've been moving more frequently lately, all heading east. Tomorrow's not a deadline for Sarah. It's a deadline for whatever you're really transporting through those tunnels. The sound of approaching riders grew louder. Jenkins's remaining men looked at him nervously, clearly wondering if they should try to make a break for it. Last chance, Captain, Jenkins said, but some of the confidence had left his voice. Save your wife, or chase shadows. What's it going to be? Marcus's response was interrupted by a familiar voice booming across the valley. Thorne, we know you're in there. This is Wild Bill Carson. The whole valley's surrounded. Come out now, or we're coming and shooting. The moment of distraction was all Jenkins needed. He kicked hard at Marcus's wounded side, the injury from their earlier escape still tender. As Marcus staggered, Jenkins dove for his fallen rifle. 2 shots rang out almost simultaneously. Jenkins's bullet grazed Marcus's shoulder, but Marcus's aim was true. The private fell, clutching his chest, his last expression one of genuine surprise. Jenkins! Marcus grabbed the dying man's collar. The tunnels. What are you moving through them? What's happening at sunset tomorrow? Blood bubbled at Jenkins's lips as he smiled one last time. Too late, Captain. The wheels are already in motion. By this time tomorrow, it all begins, and you'll either be dead trying to save your wife or too late to stop what's coming. Some choices damn us either way. His eyes glazed over, leaving Marcus with more questions than answers. Marcus, Vix called urgently. We need to move. Carson's men are taking positions all around the valley. The remaining soldiers had used the confusion to flee, disappearing into the rough terrain. The sounds of Carson's men deploying grew closer, along with the distinctive metallic click of rifles being readied. There's a narrow trail up the eastern ridge, Vix continued. If we move now, we might be able to slip through before they close the net completely. Marcus stood slowly, his mind working through the pieces of the puzzle. Sarah was indeed being held at Fort Richardson, but Jenkins's insistence on the sunset deadline had been a ploy to rush him into a rescue attempt, which meant whatever was really happening tomorrow night was the key to everything. No, he said finally. We're not running. Vix looked at him sharply. Have you lost your mind? There's at least 20 armed men out there, plus Carson himself. Exactly. Marcus checked his remaining ammunition. And they're all focused on capturing me, which means Fort Richardson will be weakly defended, Vix finished, understanding dawning in her eyes. They'll expect you to either run or make a desperate rescue attempt. They won't expect you to expose their whole operation. Marcus nodded. Jenkins said it himself. We can't save Sarah and stop their plan. Not if we do what they expect. But if we make them think I'm pinned down here, I can slip away and get to the fort, Vic said, quickly catching on. Find out what's really in those tunnels, what they're planning for tomorrow night. While I keep Carson and his men occupied, make them think they've finally cornered their prey. Marcus managed a grim smile. How's that for choosing a third option? The morning sun cast harsh shadows across Crystal Creek as Marcus positioned himself behind a cluster of boulders. Every piece of cover, every angle of fire had been carefully calculated. If he was going to convince Carson and his men that they had him trapped, the performance had to be perfect. You're sure about this? Vix asked, checking her rifle one last time. They had found a hidden position where she could slip away once the shooting started. A lot can go wrong with this plan. Everything's already gone wrong, Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the weight of their situation. But Jenkins made one critical mistake. He thought he knew exactly how I'd react. Everyone does. They see the legend of Ghost Eye, the man who never misses, and they think they can predict my every move. And instead, we're going to show them why a ghost is most dangerous when you think you have it cornered. He handed her Cooper's ledger and a folded piece of paper. The ledger proves Hawthorne's weapons dealing. The map shows the tunnel network beneath Fort Richardson. Find out what's really happening tomorrow at sunset. Vix tucked both items into her coat. What about Sarah? Marcus's jaw tightened. If you can get her out safely, do it. But not at the cost of exposing yourself. We need to know what they're planning, or a lot more families than mine will suffer. Thorne! Carson's voice boomed across the valley again. Last chance to surrender peaceful-like. You've got 1 minute before we start shooting. Guess that's my cue, Marcus said, checking his ammunition one final time. Remember, they'll be watching every obvious escape route. Use the creek bed where it narrows through the rocks. The water will hide your trail. Vix hesitated for a moment, then quickly squeezed his shoulder. Try not to get yourself killed, Ghost Eye. Would hate to miss out on my share of that bounty. Marcus managed a small smile. Thought you said your conscience was bad for business? Maybe I just found a cause worth more than money. With that, she melted away into the shadows of the creek bed, moving with the silence that had made her the territory's best tracker. Marcus took a deep breath, settling into the calm focus that had made him legendary. His first shot would have to be perfect. Good enough to impress, but not so good as to end the fight too quickly. He needed to keep Carson's men engaged, make them think they were slowly wearing him down. Time's up, Thorne, Carson called out. Don't make me kill you, son. There's been enough blood spilled already. Marcus raised his rifle, picking out a soldier who had left himself slightly exposed. The man's position suggested he was part of Carson's flanking movement. Wounding him would force the others to adjust their approach. His shot cracked across the valley like thunder. The soldier fell with a shout, clutching his arm where Marcus's bullet had grazed him. Instantly, the air filled with return fire, bullets chipping away at the rocks around Marcus's position. That's mighty fine shooting, Ghost Eye. Carson's voice carried a note of genuine admiration. But you're only delaying the inevitable. We've got you surrounded and reinforcements are on the way. Marcus fired again, deliberately missing Carson by inches. The bounty hunter's answering laugh carried across the gunfire. Getting sloppy, Captain. Never knew you to miss before. Maybe I'm not trying to kill anyone today, Marcus called back, moving to a new position as bullets sparked off the rocks around him. Just like I wasn't trying to kill anyone at Fort Richardson. That so? The bodies in Ghost Valley tell a different story. Marcus's next shot knocked the hat off one of Carson's men. Check those bodies again, Carson. Check the ammunition in their wounds. Military issue, all of it. The same kind Hawthorne's been selling under the table. He caught glimpses of Carson's men advancing between bursts of gunfire, trying to close the circle. Good. The more focused they were on him, the better chance Vix had of slipping away unnoticed. "You're saying Hawthorne's behind the Ghost Valley massacre?" Carson asked, sounding genuinely curious despite the ongoing firefight. "Why should I believe you?" "Because you're not stupid, Bill." Marcus moved again, making it look like he was being forced into a smaller area. "You've been tracking me for weeks. How many innocent people have I killed? How many times could I have shot to kill today instead of wound?" A pause in the gunfire. Marcus used it to quickly reload, knowing he'd need every bullet to maintain the illusion of being pinned down. "Maybe," Carson admitted, "but that doesn't change the fact that I've got a job to do. $5,000 is $5,000. "And what happens tomorrow at sunset?" Marcus challenged. "When whatever Hawthorne's planning that tears this territory apart? How much will your bounty be worth then?" Another pause. Longer this time. Marcus could almost see the wheels turning in Carson's mind. The bounty hunter hadn't survived this long by being unobservant. "You've got proof of these claims?" Carson asked finally. "Better than proof," Marcus replied. "I know where to find their operation, but we're running out of time. By sunset tomorrow, it'll be too late." The gunfire had almost completely stopped now. Marcus remained in cover, knowing this was the most dangerous moment. If Carson believed him, they might have a chance. If not... "Tell you what, Ghost Eye," Carson said slowly. "Throw out your weapons, come out with your hands up. You do that, I'll give you 5 minutes to convince me. That's the best offer you're going to get." Marcus checked his ammunition. 3 rounds left in the rifle, 2 in his revolver. Not enough for a prolonged fight anyway. And if he was right about Carson, the bounty hunter's curiosity might buy him enough time for Vix to complete her mission. "All right, Carson," he called out, making his voice sound resigned. "You've got a deal, but you better listen fast because after sunset tomorrow, bounty hunting is going to be the least of our problems." The sun had climbed higher in the sky as Marcus stood in the center of Crystal Creek Valley, his weapons laid carefully on the ground before him. Carson's men formed a loose circle, rifles trained on his position, while the bounty hunter himself approached with deliberate steps. "You're taking an awful big risk, Ghost Eye," Carson said, stopping just out of arm's reach. His weathered face showed genuine curiosity beneath its professional mask. "Must be quite a story you're fixing to tell." "Look at your men, Bill," Marcus replied calmly, nodding toward the soldiers he'd wounded earlier. "Every shot was calculated. Injuries that'll heal, nothing fatal. Does that match the bloodthirsty killer Hawthorne's been describing?" Carson studied him for a long moment. "Jenkins and his boys might disagree with your non-lethal policy. Jenkins was working for someone bigger than Hawthorne. They're using the weapons sales as cover for something else, something happening tomorrow at sunset." Marcus met Carson's gaze steadily. "You've been in this territory a long time. Haven't you noticed anything strange lately? Supply caravans moving at night, wealthy landowners selling their properties to mysterious buyers?" The bounty hunter's eyes narrowed slightly. Behind him, his men shifted uneasily, several exchanging glances. They'd noticed it too, Marcus realized. Carson wasn't the only one with questions. "Say I believe you," Carson said finally. "Say there is something bigger happening. Why come out now? Why risk surrendering?" "Because we're running out of time." Marcus took a calculated risk, turning slightly to address the other men as well. "Tomorrow at sunset, whatever they're planning comes to fruition. The territory erupts into chaos, martial law is declared, and suddenly all those mysterious land purchases make sense. It's not just corruption. It's conquest through economics." A murmur ran through Carson's men. The bounty hunter raised a hand for silence, but Marcus caught the flicker of concern in his eyes. "That's quite a tale," Carson said carefully. "But you still haven't explained Ghost Valley. Those people were murdered, Thorne. Someone has to answer for that." "Check the bodies," Marcus repeated. Check the bullet wounds, military ammunition, all of it. The same kind Hawthorne's been selling. I refused to carry out his order to massacre those people, so he had someone else do it, and pinned it on me. And your wife? Word is Hawthorne's holding her at Fort Richardson. Another piece of their game. They're using her to control me, trying to force me into making a desperate rescue attempt. Marcus allowed some of his genuine anger to show. They think they know exactly how I'll react, that I'll either get myself killed trying to save her or run away and let their plans proceed unchallenged. Carson holstered his revolver, a small gesture of trust that didn't go unnoticed by his men. You're talking about powerful people, Ghost Eye, the kind that can make men disappear without a trace. Why should we risk getting involved? Because once they've seized control of the territory, how long before they come for you too? Marcus gestured to the gathered men. How long before your usefulness ends and you become another loose end to tie up? The words struck home. Several of Carson's men lowered their rifles slightly, their expressions troubled. They'd seen enough of the territory's corruption to know Marcus's warnings carried weight. You said you know where their operation is, Carson prompted. Where they're storing whatever's really being moved through those tunnels. I do, but we'll need help to expose it. Marcus turned to face the bounty hunter directly. You're not just any hired gun, Carson. People respect you, trust your word. If you back my story, others will listen. And if I don't? If I decide to collect that bounty anyway? Then I'll probably die trying to stop you, Marcus said simply. But so will some of your men. And tomorrow at sunset, everything we've fought for in this territory will start crumbling away. The choice is yours. A tense silence fell over the valley. Carson's men watched their leader, waiting for his decision. The bounty hunter stared at Marcus for what felt like an eternity, weighing not just his words but the implications behind them. Finally, Carson spoke. 2 days ago, I watched a caravan pass through Devil's Pass. Mining equipment, they said. But the cargo was guarded by more armed men than I've ever seen on a simple supply run. When I asked questions in the next town, I found myself being watched. Subtle, but there. He turned to his men. How many of you have noticed similar things, strange shipments, unexplained military patrols, wealthy folks suddenly selling land that's been in their families for generations? The uneasy murmurs and nods confirmed what Marcus had hoped. They'd all seen pieces of the puzzle without realizing what they were part of. Here's what I think, Carson continued. I think our friend Ghost Eye here is either telling the truth, or he spun the most elaborate lie I've ever heard. Either way, something's happening in this territory. Something that doesn't smell right. He faced Marcus again. You've got until sunset tomorrow to prove your claims. My men and I will help, but understand this. If you're lying, if this is some kind of trick, there won't be a hole deep enough for you to hide in. Are we clear? Crystal, Marcus replied, allowing himself to feel the first glimmer of hope. And Bill. Thank you. Carson handed him back his weapons. Don't thank me yet, Ghost Eye. We still have to figure out what's really happening at Fort Richardson, and somehow I don't think they're going to just let us walk in and ask questions. Thunder rumbled in the distance as Marcus, Carson, and a select group of the bounty hunter's most trusted men gathered in an abandoned cabin near Fort Richardson. The afternoon sky had darkened with approaching storm clouds, casting an ominous shadow over the weathered structure. The cabin, once a way station for cattle drives, now served as their impromptu war room, its wooden walls offering shelter from both the coming storm and prying eyes. Inside, the musty air hung heavy with tension. A rough-hewn table dominated the main room, its surface covered with maps and documents illuminated by flickering lantern light. The assembled men, hardened by years of tracking outlaws across unforgiving territory, stood in uncharacteristic silence as they awaited news from their scouts. Jim Hawkins, Carson's best reconnaissance man, slipped through the door like a ghost, water dripping from his oilskin coat. The veteran scout's face bore the grave expression of a man carrying weighted news. Fort's running on half garrison, he reported, moving to the table. Most of Hawthorne's regular troops are out on patrol. At least that's the official story. Been watching their movements all morning. Something big's brewing, and they ain't bothering much to hide it anymore. Marcus studied the rough map they'd drawn, his fingers tracing the fort's outline. Numbers? Positions? Maybe 30 men inside, plus Hawthorne's personal guard. Hard boys, all of them. Hand-picked for loyalty rather than skill. Hawkins leaned forward, pointing to the fort's eastern section. But here's the strange part. They've blocked off the entire storage area. Double guards, nobody allowed in without written permission from the general himself. Even saw them turn away a lieutenant colonel who tried to requisition supplies. Carson stroked his mustache thoughtfully, his weathered face reflected in the lantern light. Mighty unusual security for a simple weapons cache. In all my years tracking runners for the Army, I never saw them lock down a storage area that tight. Because it's not weapons they're guarding, Marcus said, tracing a line on the map that represented the underground tunnels they'd discovered. These smugglers' passages we found, they connect directly to the fort's underground storage. Whatever they're planning for sunset, the key pieces are down there. Any word about Sarah? Carson asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern. The bounty hunter had developed a grudging respect for his former quarry over the past hours. Marcus shook his head, his jaw tightening. They're keeping her somewhere in the officers' quarters, but we don't know exactly where. And we still haven't heard from Vix. As if summoned by her name, a soft whistle came from outside, 3 notes in a distinct pattern that cut through the storm's growing fury. Carson's men immediately raised their rifles, but Marcus recognized the signal they'd arranged earlier. Vix slipped through the door like a shadow, her clothes dirty and wet from traveling through the storm. Her expression was grim, and she carried a leather satchel clutched tightly to her chest. The territory's best tracker looked like she'd seen ghosts. "We've got trouble," she said without preamble, moving to the table and pulling documents from her satchel. "I found out what they're moving through those tunnels and why sunset tomorrow is so important. It's bigger than anything we imagined." She spread several documents across the map, land deeds, property transfers, mining claims, all bearing tomorrow's date. "Look at these. Really look at them. Not just the dates, but the specific language they're using, the particular terms and conditions." Marcus scanned the documents, his military training helping him spot the patterns. His jaw tightened as the understanding dawned. These aren't just standard property acquisitions. They're systematically seizing water rights, every major water source in the territory. "Exactly," Vix confirmed, pulling out more papers. "Those mining supplies they've been moving through the tunnels? Equipment to dam and redirect rivers, poison wells, control every drop of water in the region. By sunset tomorrow, they'll have everything in place. The right equipment, the right papers, all legally filed and ready to implement." Carson whistled low, the sound almost lost in another rumble of thunder. Control the water. Control the territory. Brilliant in its simplicity. In all my years tracking runners for the Army, I never saw them lock down a storage area that tight. "Because it's not weapons they're guarding," Marcus said, tracing a line on the map that represented the underground tunnels they'd discovered. "These smugglers' passages we found, they connect directly to the fort's underground storage. Whatever they're planning for sunset, the key pieces are down there." "Any word about Sarah?" Carson asked quietly, his voice carrying genuine concern. The bounty hunter had developed a grudging respect for his former quarry over the past hours. Marcus shook his head, his jaw tightening. "They're keeping her somewhere in the officers' quarters, but we don't know exactly where. And we still haven't heard from Vix." As if summoned by her name, a soft whistle came from outside, 3 notes in a distinct pattern that cut through the storm's growing fury. Carson's men immediately raised their rifles, but Marcus recognized the signal they'd arranged earlier. Vix slipped through the door like a shadow, her clothes dirty and wet from traveling through the storm. Her expression was grim, and she carried a leather satchel clutched tightly to her chest. The territory's best tracker looked like she'd seen ghosts. "We've got trouble," she said without preamble, moving to the table and pulling documents from her satchel. "I found out what they're moving through those tunnels and why sunset tomorrow is so important. It's bigger than anything we imagined." She spread several documents across the map, land deeds, property transfers, mining claims, all bearing tomorrow's date. "Look at these. Really look at them. Not just the dates, but the specific language they're using, the particular terms and conditions." Marcus scanned the documents, his military training helping him spot the patterns. His jaw tightened as the understanding dawned. These aren't just standard property acquisitions. They're systematically seizing water rights. Every major water source in the territory. Exactly, Vix confirmed, pulling out more papers. Those mining supplies they've been moving through the tunnels? Equipment to dam and redirect rivers, poison wells, control every drop of water in the region. By sunset tomorrow, they'll have everything in place. The right equipment, the right papers, all legally filed and ready to implement. Carson whistled low, the sound almost lost in another rumble of thunder. Control the water. Control the territory. Brilliant in its simplicity. Folks can't ranch, can't farm, can't even live without water. They'd be forced to pay whatever price these bastards demanded. Or sell their land for pennies on the dollar, Marcus added, his mind racing ahead to the implications. But they'd need more than just equipment and legal papers. They'd need something to create enough chaos, enough distraction to keep people from realizing what was really happening until it was too late. Vix pulled out one final document, a military order, bearing Hawthorne's distinctive signature and seal. That's where you come in, Ghost Eye. Tomorrow at sunset, they're planning to publicly execute Sarah, the territory's most notorious fugitive's wife, killed while he watched helplessly. The outrage, the violence that would follow, would give them perfect cover to implement their water grab, Carson finished, his expertise in human nature showing through. The territory would erupt. Law and order would break down. By the time people realized what had really happened, these water rights would already be locked up tight and legal. Marcus's hands clenched on the table's edge, his knuckles white. Where are they holding her? Did you get that far? Better than that. Vix reached into her coat and produced a folded paper, spreading it carefully beside the others. I got the guard rotation schedule. There's a gap in the patrols around midnight. 20 minutes where the eastern section is vulnerable. They're so focused on guarding against an obvious rescue attempt, they've left themselves exposed to a more subtle approach. The same section they're using to guard the tunnel entrance, Marcus noted, his tactical mind already formulating plans. They won't expect us to hit the most heavily defended part of the fort. They'll be watching the obvious approaches, the easier routes. Carson studied the guard schedule with the attention to detail that had made him the territory's most successful bounty hunter. 20 minutes ain't much time, and once we're in, every soldier in the fort will be on us like wolves on a wounded deer. Not if we give them something else to worry about, Marcus said, his voice taking on the commanding tone that had once led men into battle. Hawkins, you said most of the garrison is out on patrol? I need to know exactly where they're positioned. The scout moved to the map, pointing to several locations with practiced precision. 3 main groups. Here, here, and here, all within a few hours' ride of the fort. They've been maintaining regular patterns almost like they want to be seen. Because they do, Marcus said, understanding dawn. They're expecting me to try something, probably counting on it. These patrols aren't just searching, they're positioned to respond to trouble at the fort. A plan began forming in his mind. So let's give them exactly what they expect, just not where they expect it. Understanding lit Carson's eyes. A diversion. Make them think you're attacking from one direction. While we slip in through another, Vix finished, nodding appreciatively. But it'll have to be convincing. Hawthorne knows how you think, how you operate. He'll be watching for any sign of deception. Marcus allowed himself a grim smile. That's exactly what we're counting on. He knows Ghost Eye never misses a shot, so when bullets start flying and nobody dies, he'll know it's me. He'll think I'm creating a distraction for a solo rescue attempt. You're talking about splitting our forces, Carson warned, his experience showing in his cautious tone. If something goes wrong, if the timing's off by even a few minutes, everything's already wrong. Marcus cut him off, his voice firm but not unkind. But we've got one advantage they don't expect. They think I'm working alone, driven by desperation to save Sarah. They won't be looking for a coordinated attack from multiple directions. He turned to address the gathered men directly. I know I'm asking a lot. This isn't your fight, and that bounty on my head is still mighty tempting. But what they're planning won't just affect me or Sarah. It'll change the entire territory, turn it into a private kingdom for men who think they can buy and sell people's lives like cattle. A moment of heavy silence followed his words, broken only by the distant thunder and the increasing patter of rain on the cabin's roof. The men exchanged glances, years of working together allowing them to communicate without words. Finally, Carson spoke. "Well, boys, what do you say? Feel like earning an honest day's pay for once?" The men's response was unanimous, grim nods and determined expressions that spoke louder than words. They were bounty hunters and trackers used to working on the edges of the law, but each had seen enough corruption to know when it was time to take a stand. "All right then," Marcus said, turning back to the map as lightning illuminated the cabin through its grimy windows. "Here's how we're going to do this, Carson. I'll need your best riders split into 3 groups. When the storm hits its peak, we'll begin." Midnight approached Fort Richardson under a torrent of rain. The storm that had threatened all evening had finally broken, turning the world into a chaos of wind and water. Lightning split the sky at irregular intervals, followed by thunder that seemed to shake the very foundations of the earth. Marcus crouched in the shadows near the fort's eastern wall, rain streaming down his face. The weather was both blessing and curse. The storm provided excellent cover, but it also made every movement treacherous on the mud-slicked ground. Through the downpour, he could barely make out the shapes of the guards on the walls, their oilskin coats gleaming dully in the occasional lightning flashes. "Almost time," Vix whispered beside him, her voice barely audible above the storm. Carson's men should be in position by now. As if in response, a series of shots rang out from the fort's western edge, followed by shouts of alarm. The diversion had begun right on schedule. Marcus watched as guards rushed along the walls toward the commotion, their boots thundering on the wooden walkways. "Hawthorne's not taking any chances," he observed, counting the men who remained at their posts despite the attack. "Those guards on the eastern section haven't moved an inch." "He knows you too well," Vix replied. "Expects you to use the chaos as cover for a rescue attempt. That's why we're not going for Sarah first." Marcus nodded grimly. The plan they'd devised was risky, counting on precise timing and the assumption that Hawthorne's arrogance would blind him to the possibility of a larger conspiracy. The general would be expecting Ghost Eye to attempt a daring rescue, not a coordinated strike at the heart of his operation. More gunfire erupted from the western side, accompanied by the distinctive crack of Carson's rifle. The bounty hunter was putting on quite a show, making it look like a serious assault while ensuring no bullets found their marks. The kind of shooting that only a man of Marcus's reputation could manage in these conditions. "There's the signal," Vix said, as 3 shots rang out in quick succession. "Ready?" Marcus checked his weapons one final time. "Remember, the tunnels are the priority. Find out what's really down there, what they're planning to use to control the water supply. Sarah." His voice caught slightly. "Sarah would understand." Vix's hand found his shoulder in the darkness. "We'll get her out too. But first, we end this." They moved forward as another lightning flash illuminated the fort. The guard rotation schedule Vix had stolen showed a brief gap in the patrol pattern, 20 seconds where the shadows near the eastern wall would be unwatched, 20 seconds to cover 30 yards of open ground. Thunder crashed overhead as they sprinted through the rain. Marcus counted heartbeats, knowing their lives depended on perfect timing. They reached the wall just as a guard passed overhead, his attention focused on the commotion at the other end of the fort. Vix produced a coil of rope with a grappling hook, waiting for the next lightning flash. The hook sailed upward in the darkness, catching securely on the wall's edge. They climbed quickly, years of experience making the ascent almost routine despite the rain-slicked rope. The eastern storage area lay before them, its heavy doors guarded by 4 men who stood resolute despite the storm. Beyond those doors lay the entrance to the tunnel network, and the truth about Hawthorne's plans. 6 minutes until the next patrol, Vix whispered, checking her timepiece. "How do you want to handle the guards?" Marcus studied the men's positions, noting their disciplined stance and alert postures. These weren't ordinary soldiers. They were Hawthorne's personal guard, chosen for loyalty rather than skill. They wouldn't be easily distracted or fooled. "We do this quick and quiet," he replied, drawing his knife. "No shots to give us away. You take the two on the left, I'll handle the right." They moved forward through the rain using the storm's fury as cover. The guards never saw them coming. Marcus struck with surgical precision, using the knife's pommel to render his targets unconscious without permanent harm. Beside him, Vix moved like a shadow, her own attack swift and silent. 5 minutes, she reported, as they dragged the unconscious guards into the shadows. The door's locked. Heavy iron. Looks like it needs a key. Marcus examined the lock, his experienced eyes noting its quality. This isn't a standard military issue. They brought this in special, along with everything else they're hiding down there. "Allow me." Vix produced a set of lockpicks from her coat. "Tracking isn't my only skill." While she worked on the lock, Marcus kept watch. The sounds of fighting continued from the western side, but something felt wrong. The pattern of gunfire had changed, becoming more erratic. Carson's in trouble, he realized. They're not buying the diversion anymore. "Almost. Got it," Vix announced as the lock clicked open. "We need to hurry." They slipped through the door into a torchlit corridor that descended beneath the fort. The air grew cooler as they moved deeper, the sounds of the storm fading behind them. After about 50 yards, the passage opened into a large underground chamber. What they found there made them both stop in their tracks. "Dear God," Vix breathed, "this is worse than we imagined." The underground chamber beneath Fort Richardson stretched out like a terrible secret finally exposed to light. Massive steam-powered pumps lined the stone walls, their copper pipes disappearing into carefully engineered tunnels marked with recent survey flags. The chamber itself had been expanded recently. Tool marks still fresh on the rock, sawdust from new support beams scattered across the floor. Under the flickering lamplight, maps covered a large oak table, showing every water source in the territory: rivers, streams, aquifers, and wells, each marked with planned dam locations and diversion points in precise military notation. But it was the documents scattered across a nearby desk that revealed the true scope of Hawthorne's plan. Land deeds, water rights transfers, and military orders, all bearing the signatures of territorial judges and officials Marcus recognized. Letters between conspirators, carefully coded but clear enough when you knew what to look for. The corruption reached into every level of government, a cancer that had spread far beyond one corrupt general. "They weren't just planning to control the water," Marcus said, scanning the papers quickly while Vix kept watch. "They're going to poison it first, create a crisis, then present themselves as the solution." He held up a document detailing chemical compounds and deployment schedules. "These supplies they've been moving through the tunnels, they're contaminants. Enough to make every major water source in the territory unusable for months. Forcing everyone to rely on their clean water sources," Vix finished, her voice tight with anger. "At whatever price they set. The perfect trap. They'd own everything and everyone within 6 months." Their examination was interrupted by the sound of boots on stone, multiple sets approaching rapidly from the corridor they'd entered through. The echoes suggested at least a dozen men, moving with military precision. "Seems we've overstayed our welcome," Vix said, drawing her rifle and checking her ammunition. "Take the documents," Marcus ordered, gathering the most damning evidence into a leather satchel. "Get them to Carson. I'll hold them here." "Like hell you will," Vix began, but Marcus cut her off with a sharp gesture. "Sarah's still in danger. Someone needs to get to her before Hawthorne realizes his plan is exposed. You're the only one who knows where they're keeping her. And these papers," he patted the satchel, "are worth more than my life right now." Before Vix could argue further, General Hawthorne's voice echoed through the chamber, smooth as aged whiskey but with poison underneath. "I must admit, Captain Thorne, you continue to impress me. I expected you to attempt some foolhardy rescue, but this shows real insight. Though I suppose I shouldn't be surprised. You always were one of my best officers." The general emerged from a side tunnel flanked by armed guards. He looked exactly as Marcus remembered, immaculately uniformed despite the late hour, his bearing radiating absolute authority. Not a hair out of place, not a speck of dust on his polished boots. Even now, he played the role of the perfect commander. "Go," Marcus whispered to Vix. "Now." She hesitated for just a moment, then melted into the shadows of a secondary tunnel, taking the crucial evidence with her. "Your reputation for accuracy is well deserved," Hawthorne continued, seemingly unaware of Vix's escape. "You managed to piece together enough of our operation to become genuinely dangerous. Unfortunately, that makes what happens next rather predictable. A shame, really. You could have been part of this, Marcus, could have secured your family's future." "You won't get away with this," Marcus said, keeping his rifle trained on the general while calculating angles and positions. "The territory won't stand for it. People won't just roll over and let you steal their water, their livelihoods." Hawthorne laughed, the sound bouncing off the stone walls. "The territory will do exactly what it's told. Once the water crisis begins, people will beg us to save them. They'll sign anything, pay anything. And the best part? It will all be perfectly legal. Every document stamped and certified, every transfer witnessed and recorded. Not once these documents become public, not when people learn what you're planning. Documents can be disputed, witnesses discredited. But a tragic story of a desperate fugitive making one last fatal attempt to rescue his wife and unborn child? That's something people will remember." Hawthorne's smile turned cruel. "Speaking of your wife, would you like to see her one last time before the execution?" On cue, 2 soldiers dragged Sarah into the chamber. Her face was bruised, her dress torn, but her eyes blazed with defiance when she saw Marcus. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "They found out about the baby, used it to make me tell them where you'd likely go. I tried to resist." "The baby is what makes this all so perfect," Hawthorne said, drawing his pistol with elegant precision. "The tragic death of an expectant mother, killed while her fugitive husband watched helplessly. The territory will erupt in violence, providing the perfect cover for our operation." "You're right about one thing," Marcus replied, his voice deadly calm as he noted the steam pipes running overhead, the positions of each guard, the shadows where Vix had disappeared. "This ends tragically for someone." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. As Hawthorne raised his pistol toward Sarah, Marcus lived up to his reputation as the man who never missed. His first shot knocked the general's gun away with surgical precision. His second struck the lantern above the soldiers holding Sarah, plunging that part of the chamber into darkness. In the confusion that followed, Marcus moved like the ghost they'd named him after. 2 more shots disabled the guards nearest Sarah, striking arms and legs with calculated precision. A third bullet struck the steam pipe above Hawthorne's remaining men, filling the chamber with obscuring vapor. "Get her out of here." Vix's voice came from the darkness as she reappeared, providing covering fire while Marcus reached Sarah. "No!" Hawthorne shouted, his carefully maintained composure finally cracking. "Kill them all! Don't let them escape." But the soldiers hesitated, unable to locate their targets in the steam and shadows. By the time they began firing, Marcus had already led Sarah toward the exit where Carson and his men waited, drawn by the sound of gunfire. "The evidence?" Marcus asked as they retreated through the tunnels. "Already on its way to the territorial governor," Carson confirmed, his men providing coverage for their escape, along with some rather interesting sworn statements from folks who've been helping Hawthorne. Amazing how quick men turn when they realize they're on the losing side. Dawn found Marcus standing with Sarah and Vix on a hillside overlooking Fort Richardson. Below, soldiers led Hawthorne and his conspirators away in chains, while Carson supervised the seizure of documents and equipment from the underground chamber. "What happens now?" Sarah asked, her hand protectively over her stomach where their child grew. "Now the territory knows the truth," Marcus replied, holding her close. "About Hawthorne, about the water rights scheme, about everything. There will be trials, investigations, changes. And us?" Marcus looked at his wife, then at Vix and Carson, who had become unlikely allies. "I think it's time Ghost Eye retired. Found a quieter life somewhere? Plant something instead of shooting things. You could stay, Carson offered, cleaning his rifle one last time. Territory could use a man with your skills, this time on the right side of the law. Marcus shook his head. I've had enough of violence. Time to build something instead of taking lives. Well, Vix said with a smile, checking her saddlebags, wherever you end up, try to stay out of trouble. Would hate to have to track you down again. As the sun rose fully over the fort, Marcus held Sarah close, feeling their unborn child move beneath his hand. The legend of Ghost Eye, the man who never missed, would fade into territory history. But somewhere, a new story was about to begin. One of redemption, justice, and the quiet courage it takes to build rather than destroy. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.